The black sedan pulled up to the Grand Royal Hotel at exactly 6:30 p.m. on a Tuesday evening. Behind the wheel sat David Park, a man who looked nothing like what most people would expect from a billionaire tech CEO. At 35 years old, David had learned long ago that expensive suits and flashy cars only attracted unwanted attention. Tonight he wore his favorite pair of well-worn jeans, a simple navy blue button-down shirt, and comfortable sneakers that had seen better days. David stepped out of his rental car and handed the keys to the valet. The young man looked confused, for a moment clearly expecting someone more impressive. After all, this was the Grand Royal Hotel, where celebrities and business moguls stayed when they visited the city. The valet glanced at David's casual outfit and then at the modest sedan, probably wondering if this guy had made a mistake about which hotel he was visiting. The thing is, David could have easily arrived in a Ferrari or a Rolls-Royce. His garage, back home in Silicon Valley, housed a collection of cars worth more than most people's houses. But David had always believed that real wealth didn't need to shout. His company, TechFlow Innovations, had just crossed the $3 billion mark in valuation, making him one of the youngest self-made billionaires in the country. Yet here he was, looking like any regular guy heading into what was supposedly one of the most exclusive hotels in the state. As David walked through the massive glass doors, he couldn't help but notice the hotel's incredible lobby. Crystal chandeliers hung from a ceiling that seemed to reach the sky. Marble floors so polished they looked like mirrors reflected the warm golden light. Expensive artwork lined the walls and fresh flowers filled every corner with their sweet scent. This place was definitely trying to impress, and David had to admit it was working. But what caught his attention more than the fancy decorations were the people. Guests moved through the lobby like they owned the world, dressed in clothes that probably cost more than most people made in a month. Women in designer dresses that sparkled under the lights, men in suits so perfectly tailored they looked like they were painted on. Everyone seemed to belong here except for David in his simple clothes. David approached the reception desk, where two staff members stood behind a counter that looked like it was carved from a single piece of black marble. The nameplate of the first clerk read, Rebecca Thompson, Guest Services Manager. She was probably in her mid-40s with her hair pulled back so tight it could have been painted on her head. Her colleague, a younger woman whose badge said Jessica Williams, Front Desk Associate, stood beside her with the kind of smile that looked practiced in a mirror. Both women looked up as David approached, and he could see their expressions change in real time. It was subtle, but David had seen it countless times before. Their professional smiles became just a little less warm. Their posture straightened just a bit more. Their eyes did a quick scan from his sneakers to his casual shirt, and he could practically see the mental calculation happening behind their eyes. "Good evening," David said with a genuine smile. "I have a reservation under the name David Park. I believe it's for the presidential suite." Rebecca's eyebrows rose slightly, and she exchanged a quick glance with Jessica. The presidential suite was their most expensive room, costing more per night than many people made in a month. It came with a private butler, a full kitchen, a conference room, and views of the entire city skyline. "Of course, sir," Rebecca said, though her tone suggested she thought this might be some kind of mistake. "Let me just pull that up for you." Her fingers clicked across the keyboard, and David could see her screen reflected in her glasses. After a moment, her expression shifted to something between surprise and suspicion. "I do see a reservation here for David Park," she said slowly. "However, the presidential suite is quite expensive. Are you certain this is the correct reservation?" David had been through this dance before. "Yes, I'm quite sure. I made the reservation myself last week." Jessica leaned over to whisper something in Rebecca's ear, and both women looked at David again. This time, their assessment was even less subtle. David could practically hear their thoughts. "This guy in jeans and sneakers wants to stay in our most expensive suite. Something doesn't add up." "Well," Rebecca continued, "we'll need to verify your method of payment before we can complete the check-in process. This is standard procedure for our premium accommodations." David nodded and reached for his wallet. He pulled out a card that looked different from the usual credit cards most people carried. It was completely black, made of metal rather than plastic, and had no visible numbers or logos on the front. This was his Centurion card, also known as the Black Card, one of the most exclusive credit cards in the world. Only people with extremely high net worth could even qualify for one. He placed the card on the marble counter and both women stared at it like it was some kind of alien artifact. Rebecca picked it up, turning it over in her hands with obvious confusion. "This is unusual," she said, holding the card up to the light as if checking for watermarks. "I've never seen anything quite like this before." David remained patient, though he could feel a familiar frustration building in his chest. "It's a Centurion card from American Express. You should be able to process it like any other credit card." "Centurion card?" Jessica repeated, clearly having never heard the term before. "Are you sure this is real? I mean, it doesn't look like any credit card I've ever seen." The conversation was starting to attract attention from other guests in the lobby. A couple, in expensive evening wear, had stopped their conversation to watch the scene unfold. An elderly man in a perfectly pressed suit was pretending to read his newspaper, while obviously listening to every word. Rebecca held the card closer to her computer screen, as if comparing it to something. "Sir, I'm going to need to call our manager. This card looks, well, it looks fake to me. We've had issues with fraudulent cards before, and we take these matters very seriously." David felt his jaw tighten slightly, but he kept his voice calm. "I assure you the card is completely legitimate. Perhaps you could try running it through your system first?" "I don't think that's advisable," Rebecca replied, her tone becoming more formal and cold. "Given the suspicious nature of this card, and the significant cost of the presidential suite, I think it would be best if we had our security team take a look at this situation." The word security seemed to echo through the lobby, and now David was certain that every person within earshot was watching their interaction. He could feel their stares, hear their whispered conversations, see their pointed fingers. The humiliation was beginning, and David realized that what had started as a simple hotel check-in was about to become something much worse. But David had learned long ago that sometimes the best response to prejudice was patience. After all, he had a feeling this situation was about to teach everyone involved a very expensive lesson about the danger of judging people by their appearance. Within minutes, the lobby atmosphere had completely changed. What started as quiet whispers had turned into open staring. David could feel dozens of eyes on him as he stood at the reception desk, waiting for Rebecca to make her next move. The elegant guests in their expensive clothes were no longer pretending to mind their own business. They had front row seats to what they clearly thought was about to be a very entertaining show. Rebecca held David's black card like it was evidence in a crime scene. She kept turning it over in her hands, examining every detail with the intensity of a detective. Jessica had moved closer, both women now studying the card as if they were experts in credit card fraud detection. "You know what?" Rebecca said loudly, making sure her voice carried across the marble lobby. "I think we need to call the police. This card looks completely fake to me." David felt his heart rate increase, but he kept his voice steady. "Ma'am, I understand your caution, but that card is completely legitimate. Perhaps you could simply try processing it through your system." "Oh, I'm not putting this suspicious card anywhere near our payment system," Rebecca replied, waving the black card in the air like a flag. "Do you have any idea how much the presidential suite costs per night? It's $12,000. That's more than most people make in 3 months. The number seemed to ripple through the watching crowd. $12,000 for one night. David could hear the gasps, see the shocked expressions. To most people, that was an impossible amount of money to spend on a hotel room. "And you want us to believe," Rebecca continued, her voice getting louder with each word, "that someone dressed like they just came from a garage sale can afford our most expensive suite?" A few guests actually laughed at that comment. David could see a woman in a sparkling dress nudge her companion, both of them smirking at his expense. An older man, in a perfectly tailored suit, was shaking his head with obvious amusement. That's when the hotel manager appeared. Thomas Worthington was a man who looked like he had been born wearing an expensive suit. Everything about him screamed old money and privilege. His silver hair was perfectly styled, His shoes were polished to mirror brightness, and he carried himself like he owned not just the hotel, but the entire city block. "What seems to be the problem here?" Thomas asked, though his tone suggested he had already decided what the problem was. Rebecca quickly filled him in, speaking just loud enough for the growing crowd to hear every word. "This gentleman claims to have a reservation for the presidential suite, but he's presented us with what appears to be a fake credit card. It's completely black and doesn't look like any card I've ever seen." Thomas took the card from Rebecca and held it up to the light, examining it with theatrical precision. David could see him turning it over, bending it slightly, even holding it up to his ear as if listening for something. "Very interesting," Thomas said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You know, we've seen an increase in credit card fraud lately. People making fake IDs, fake cards, trying to live a lifestyle they can't afford." "Sir," David said, trying to keep his patience, "if you would just run the card through your system, run it through our system." Thomas interrupted with a laugh that was loud enough for everyone in the lobby to hear. "Young man, do you have any idea what kind of clientele we serve here? We have Fortune 500 CEOs, Hollywood celebrities, foreign dignitaries. We don't just accept random cards from people who walk in off the street." The crowd was growing larger now. David could see hotel guests coming down from the elevators, drawn by the commotion. Others were coming in from the hotel restaurant, drinks still in their hands. Everyone wanted to see what was happening. "Tell you what," Thomas continued, pulling out his phone. "Let me call American Express right now and verify this card, but I'm betting they're going to tell me they've never seen anything like this before." David almost smiled at that. If Thomas actually called American Express about a Centurion card, he was in for quite a surprise. But David had a feeling this situation was about to get much worse before it got better. Thomas dialed a number and put the phone on speaker, apparently wanting everyone to hear the conversation. A customer service representative answered after a few rings. "American Express. Customer service, how can I help you?" "Yes, I'm calling from the Grand Royal Hotel," Thomas said importantly. "We have a customer here with what appears to be a fraudulent credit card. It's completely black and has no visible numbers. Can you tell me if this is something American Express actually issues?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Sir, could you describe the card in more detail? It's metal, completely black, very plain looking. Doesn't look like any credit card I've ever seen." Another pause. "Sir, what you're describing sounds like it could be a Centurion card. Those are legitimate American Express cards, though they're quite rare." Thomas's confident expression faltered slightly. "Centurion card? What's that?" "It's an invitation-only card for our most valued customers. Only people with extremely high net worth qualify for one. If someone has a Centurion card, they're definitely legitimate customers." The lobby had gone completely quiet. David could see the confusion spreading across Thomas's face, but the man was clearly not ready to give up. "Well, even if the card is real," Thomas said loudly, snapping the phone shut, "that doesn't mean this person can afford our presidential suite. I mean, look at him. Does he look like someone who belongs in a $12,000 hotel room?" The crowd murmured in agreement. David could see heads nodding, people whispering among themselves. In their minds, wealthy people looked a certain way, dressed a certain way, acted a certain way. David, in his jeans and sneakers, didn't fit their image of success. "Maybe you'd be more comfortable at the budget hotel down the street," Thomas suggested with a smirk. "I think there's a place there that charges about $50 a night. That might be more in your price range." The suggestion drew more laughter from the crowd. David could see people pulling out their phones now, recording the interaction. He realized this humiliating moment was probably going to end up on social media within the hour. Or perhaps, Thomas continued, clearly enjoying himself now, you could call your parents and ask them to help you pay for a room you can actually afford. That comment hit particularly hard. David thought about his parents, who had worked 2 jobs each to help pay for his college education. They had sacrificed everything to give him opportunities they never had. They would be heartbroken to see their son being treated this way. But David had learned something important during his years building his company. Sometimes the best response to disrespect was simply to remember who you really were. He calmly reached into his wallet and pulled out a simple business card. "Here's my card," David said quietly, placing it on the marble counter next to his black credit card. "Perhaps you'd like to Google my name before you make any more assumptions." Thomas picked up the business card and read it aloud. David Park, Chief Executive Officer, TechFlow Innovations. He looked up at David with obvious skepticism. Anyone can print business cards, but David could see Jessica behind the counter frantically typing on her computer. Her eyes were getting wider with each word she read. She whispered something to Rebecca, who immediately grabbed the computer screen and started reading for herself. Fatir. Color was slowly draining from both women's faces, and David knew they had just discovered exactly who they had been humiliating for the past 20 minutes. The real question now was what they were going to do about it. Jessica's hands were shaking as she stared at her computer screen. The color had completely drained from her face, and she kept refreshing the page as if hoping the information would somehow change. Rebecca leaned over her shoulder, reading the same articles that were making Jessica's eyes grow wider by the second. Meanwhile, Thomas was still holding David's business card, completely unaware that his two front desk employees had just discovered they were in serious trouble. He was actually smiling, clearly enjoying what he thought was his moment of triumph over someone trying to scam his precious hotel. TechFlow Innovations, Thomas read aloud with a mocking tone. Never heard of it. Probably some small startup, working out of a garage somewhere. The crowd around them had grown even larger. Hotel guests were now openly filming with their phones, and David could see some of them were already posting to their social media accounts. The hashtags were probably already trending. Israr Hotel Fail, Fake It, Till You Make It, Isar Budget, Guest Expensive Hotel. But Jessica couldn't take it anymore. She grabbed Rebecca's arm and whispered urgently, "We need to talk to you privately, right now." Thomas noticed the panic in Jessica's voice and turned toward the computer screen. "What's wrong? Did you find something about this company?" Rebecca's voice came out as barely a whisper. "Sir, maybe we should step into the back office for a moment." "Nonsense," Thomas replied confidently. "Whatever you found, we can discuss it right here. I'm sure our guests would love to hear about this gentleman's little startup company." Jessica looked like she was about to be sick. She pointed at the computer screen with a trembling finger. "Sir, TechFlow Innovations isn't a startup. It's one of the biggest financial technology companies in the country." Thomas's smile faltered slightly, but he wasn't ready to give up. "That's impossible. Look at him. Does he look like a CEO to you?" According to Forbes magazine, Rebecca read from the screen in a shaky voice. David Park, age 35, built TechFlow. Innovations from nothing into a company, now valued at over $3 billion. He's listed as one of the youngest self-made billionaires in America. The lobby went completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the marble floor. Every phone that had been recording was now pointed directly at Thomas, capturing his reaction as the reality of the situation began to sink in. Thomas snatched the computer screen toward himself and started reading. His confident expression slowly melted away as he scrolled through article after article. 30 Under 30 Entrepreneur of the Year. The quiet billionaire who's changing how we pay. From college dropout to tech titan, the David Park story. "There are pictures," Jessica whispered, pointing at the screen. "Lots of pictures." And there were photos of David receiving awards, speaking at conferences, shaking hands with other famous CEOs. In every single picture, he was dressed exactly like he was right now. Simple clothes, casual style, genuine smile. This wasn't someone pretending to be wealthy. This was someone who was so wealthy he didn't need to prove it to anyone. The crowd of hotel guests had gone from entertained to horrified as they realized what they had just witnessed. They had watched their hotel's management team publicly humiliate a billionaire. Some of them were quietly deleting the videos they had posted, suddenly understanding that this story wasn't going to end the way they thought it would. Thomas was still staring at the computer screen, scrolling through article after article. Each one confirmed the same impossible truth. The young man in jeans and sneakers standing patiently at their reception desk was worth more money than most small countries. "This has to be fake," Thomas muttered. but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. Someone could have created fake articles, fake websites. Sir, Rebecca interrupted quietly. These articles are from Forbes, Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, TechCrunch. They all say the same thing. And look at this. She pointed to a recent article dated just 2 weeks ago. He was just named to Time magazine's list of the 100 most influential people in technology. David had remained quiet during this entire exchange, watching as the reality slowly dawned on the hotel staff. He could see the exact moment when Thomas understood the magnitude of his mistake. The man's face went from confident to confused to absolutely terrified in the span of about 30 seconds. Mr. Park, Thomas began, his voice suddenly much smaller and more respectful. I think there may have been a misunderstanding. Oh, there's been no misunderstanding, David replied calmly. You made it very clear what you think of me based on how I choose to dress. You called security, suggested I was committing fraud, recommended I stay at a budget hotel, and told me to call my parents for money. All while your customers filmed the entire interaction for social media. Thomas looked around the lobby and seemed to notice for the first time how many people were recording. The horrified expressions on the guests' faces told him everything he needed to know about how this was going to look when those videos hit the internet. Sir, please let me make this right, Thomas pleaded. We can get you checked into the presidential suite immediately, complimentary, of course, and perhaps we could offer you some additional services to apologize for any inconvenience. David picked up his black credit card from the counter and slipped it back into his wallet. You know what's interesting, Thomas? This entire situation could have been avoided if you had simply treated me with basic human respect. It wouldn't have mattered if I was a billionaire or if I was someone who could barely afford a room. Every person who walks through your doors deserves to be treated with dignity. The watching crowd was completely silent now. Many of them looked ashamed, realizing they had been part of the problem by enjoying the show instead of speaking up for what was right. The funny thing is, David continued, I actually came here tonight to finalize a business deal. My company has been in talks to acquire a chain of luxury hotels. We were planning to announce the biggest hospitality industry acquisition in decades. Thomas's eyes went wide. You mean, you're in the hotel business? Not yet, David replied. But we were supposed to sign the papers tomorrow morning. The deal was worth $2.8 billion. It would have been the largest acquisition in our company's history. David could see Thomas doing the math in his head, probably wondering if the Grand Royal Hotel was part of the chain being acquired. The panic in the man's eyes suggested he was starting to understand that this situation was about to get much worse. However, David said, pulling out his phone, after tonight's experience, I think I need to make a phone call to our legal team. We might need to reconsider whether we want to be associated with this kind of customer service philosophy. As David started dialing, Thomas realized that what had started as what he thought was a simple case of credit card fraud had just turned into a potential business disaster that could cost his company billions of dollars. And it was all being recorded by dozens of smartphones for the world to see. David's finger hovered over his phone screen as he scrolled through his contacts. Thomas watched in complete terror, knowing that whatever phone call was about to happen could destroy his career and possibly his entire company. The lobby had become so quiet that everyone could hear the soft beeping sounds as David navigated through his phone. Please, Thomas whispered, his earlier arrogance completely gone. Please don't make that call. We can work this out. I can fix this. But David had already found the number he was looking for. The contact name simply read, Legal Team, Emergency Line. This was the number he called when TechFlow Innovations needed immediate legal action, usually for million-dollar contract, disputes or major business decisions that couldn't wait until morning. The phone rang twice before a voice answered. TechFlow Legal, this is Attorney Rodriguez speaking. Mr. Park, what can we do for you? David put the phone on speaker, and his voice carried clearly across the marble lobby. Hi, Rodriguez, I need you to contact the Grandview Hotel Group immediately. Tell them we're canceling the acquisition deal effective immediately. Thomas's legs nearly gave out when he heard those words. Grandview Hotel Group was the parent company that owned the Grand Royal Hotel, along with 47 other luxury properties across the country. The acquisition deal David was talking about wasn't just about buying one hotel, it was about buying the entire chain. Cancel the acquisition? Rodriguez's voice came through the phone speaker with obvious surprise. Sir, we're supposed to sign tomorrow morning. The contracts are already prepared. The board approved the deal last week. Are you sure about this? Completely sure, David replied, his eyes never leaving Thomas's horrified face. I've just experienced the kind of customer service philosophy that this company promotes. It's not compatible with our values. Thomas found his voice and stepped forward desperately. Mr. Park, please. Whatever happened here tonight, it doesn't represent our company's values. This was a misunderstanding. A mistake. David looked at Thomas with the same calm expression he'd maintained throughout the entire ordeal. A mistake? You publicly humiliated me in front of dozens of people. You called me a fraud, suggested I was too poor to afford your hotel, and recommended I stay at a budget motel instead, all because of how I was dressed. I can explain everything to your legal team, Thomas pleaded. This was an isolated incident. It doesn't reflect how we normally treat our guests. Actually, it reflects exactly how you treat your guests, David replied. You treat people based on their appearance, their clothes, their car. You make assumptions about their worth as human beings based on superficial things. That's not a mistake, Thomas. That's a pattern of behavior. Rodriguez's voice came through the phone again. Mr. Park, canceling this deal will have significant consequences. Grandview has been counting on this acquisition to modernize their payment systems and expand internationally. Without our investment, they'll likely struggle financially. I understand the consequences, David said, but I can't in good conscience merge my company with an organization that treats people this way. By now, several hotel guests had their phones out and were live streaming the conversation. David could see the chat comments flowing across their screens as thousands of people tuned in to watch this billionaire business deal fall apart in real time. Thomas was becoming more desperate by the second. Mr. Park, I'll do anything to fix this. I'll apologize publicly. I'll change our training procedures. I'll make sure nothing like this ever happens again. You'll apologize? David asked. Thomas, you've had 35 years to learn how to treat people with respect. Your front desk staff have had their entire careers to learn that judging customers by their appearance is wrong. This isn't something that can be fixed with a quick apology. Jessica and Rebecca were standing behind the counter looking like they wanted to disappear into the floor. They both understood that their actions hadn't just embarrassed one customer. They had cost their company a multi-billion-dollar deal that would have secured jobs for thousands of employees. Rodriguez continued through the speaker. Sir, I should mention that Grandview's stock price has been rising all week in anticipation of this announcement. When news of the cancellation hits the market tomorrow, their shares will likely drop significantly. That's not my concern anymore, David replied. They should have thought about that before they trained their employees to discriminate against people based on their clothing. The crowd in the lobby was growing larger as word spread throughout the hotel. Guests from the restaurant, the bar, even the spa had come down to see what was happening. Many of them recognized the gravity of the situation. They were witnessing the collapse of one of the biggest business deals in hospitality industry history. Thomas was now visibly sweating. Mr. Park, you have to understand. This one incident doesn't represent 48 hotels and thousands of employees. You're punishing everyone for the actions of a few people. Actually, David said, pulling out his phone to show Thomas the screen. I've been reading the reviews of your other properties while you were panicking. It seems like this kind of treatment isn't uncommon. Multiple guests have complained about being judged by their appearance, being treated differently based on their perceived wealth, being made to feel unwelcome. David scrolled through several one-star reviews on his phone. Here's one from last month. Staff treated me like I didn't belong because I wasn't wearing designer clothes. Here's another. They assumed I couldn't afford the room because I'm young and was dressed casually. Thomas's face went pale as he realized that their discriminatory practices weren't limited to tonight's incident. This was apparently a company-wide problem that had been building for years. Rodriguez, David continued into the phone. I want you to prepare a press release explaining why we're withdrawing from the acquisition. Be honest about what happened tonight. The public deserves to know why. We're walking away from a $2.8 billion deal. A press release? Thomas stammered. Mr. Park, that will destroy us. When people find out why you canceled the deal, it will ruin our reputation. Your reputation was ruined the moment you decided to treat me like a criminal because of my clothes, David replied. I'm just making sure the world knows what kind of company you really are. Rodriguez's voice came through the speaker one more time. Mr. Park, I'll draft the press release tonight and have it ready for your approval in the morning. Should I also contact the other hotel chains we've been considering for acquisition? Yes, David said. Let's set up meetings with the Morrison Group and the Platinum Hospitality Company. I want to visit their properties personally to see how they treat their customers. Thomas realized that David wasn't just walking away from their deal. He was taking his billions of dollars directly to their competitors. The acquisition that was supposed to save Grandview Hotel Group was now going to help their rivals dominate the market instead. The Morrison Group? Thomas whispered. But they're our biggest competitors. They're about to become much bigger competitors, David replied, ending the call with his legal team. Congratulations, Thomas. You just handed them the deal of a lifetime. As David pocketed his phone and turned to leave, Thomas made one last desperate attempt. Mr. Park, please give us another chance. Don't let one bad night destroy everything we've built. David paused at the hotel's entrance and looked back at the crowd of people who had watched this entire situation unfold. Thomas, you didn't destroy your company tonight. You revealed what it really was. There's a difference. And with that, David walked out of the Grand Royal Hotel, leaving behind a $2.8 billion deal and a company that was about to learn the most expensive lesson in customer service in business history. The morning after David left the Grand Royal Hotel, the business world woke up to headlines that no one could have predicted. By 6 a.m. Eastern Time, every major financial news outlet was running the same shocking story. Billionaire CEO cancels $2.8 billion hotel deal after being humiliated for using Black Card. The press release from TechFlow Innovations was brutally honest. It explained exactly what had happened the night before, how David had been treated, and why the company felt they couldn't do business with an organization that judged people by their appearance. Within hours, the story had spread far beyond business news. It was trending on every social media platform, with millions of people sharing their own stories of being discriminated against because of how they looked. Thomas Worthington sat in his office at 7 a.m., staring at his computer screen, in complete disbelief. The phone hadn't stopped ringing since 6:30, and every call brought worse news. His assistant had already fielded calls from CNN, Fox Business, CNBC, and the Wall Street Journal. Everyone wanted to know how a simple hotel check-in had turned into the biggest business scandal of the year. But the media attention was only the beginning of Thomas's problems. At exactly 9:30 a.m., when the stock market opened, Grandview Hotel Group's shares began falling like a rock. In the first hour of trading, the stock price dropped from $847 per share to $652 per share. By lunchtime, it had fallen to $531. Investors were panic selling, trying to get out before the stock became completely worthless. The numbers were staggering. In a single day, Grandview Hotel Group lost over $1.2 billion in market value. Pension funds, mutual funds, and individual investors who had believed in the company's future were watching their money disappear in real time. Thomas's phone rang again. This time it was the call he had been dreading most. The name on the caller ID read, Corporate Headquarters, Chairman Wilson. Thomas, came the cold voice of Chairman Robert Wilson. I assume you've seen the news this morning. Sir, I can explain everything, Thomas began, but Wilson cut him off immediately. Explain? Thomas, you've single-handedly destroyed the biggest deal in our company's history. Do you have any idea what you've done? Thomas tried to find words, but what could he possibly say? There was no explanation that would make this situation better. The board met an emergency session this morning, Wilson continued. We've decided that effective immediately you're terminated. Security will escort you out of the building within the hour. Sir, please, Thomas pleaded. This was one mistake. One bad night. I've been with this company for 15 years. One. Mistake? Wilson's voice rose. Thomas, by noon today we'll have lost over $1 billion in market value. Our expansion plans are ruined. Our international deals are falling apart. Investors are fleeing. All because you couldn't treat a customer with basic respect. Thomas felt his world collapsing around him. 15 years of climbing the corporate ladder, building his reputation, working toward bigger and better positions. All of it was gone because of one night of poor judgment. And it's not just you, Wilson continued. The front desk staff involved in this incident are also being terminated. We can't keep employees who think it's acceptable to judge customers by their clothing. Jessica and Rebecca had already cleaned out their desks that morning. They had watched the news coverage with growing horror, realizing that their actions hadn't just cost them their jobs. They had cost thousands of their co-workers their futures as well. The ripple effects of their discrimination were spreading throughout the entire company. Meanwhile, David was having a very different kind of morning. He was sitting in the conference room of the Morrison Hotel Group, being treated with the respect and professionalism that should have been standard everywhere. The Morrison executives had seen the news coverage and understood exactly what kind of opportunity had just fallen into their lap. Mr. Park, said Morrison CEO Patricia Chen, we're honored that you're considering us for this acquisition. I want you to know that respect for all customers, regardless of their appearance or background, is one of our core values. I'm glad to hear that, David replied, because after last night I'm very interested in working with companies that understand basic human dignity. The Morrison Group had been trying to compete with Grandview for years, but they had never had the resources to match their rivals' expansion plans. Now, with David's $2.8 billion investment, they would instantly become the largest luxury hotel chain in the country. We have 43 properties currently, Patricia continued. And with your investment, we could expand to over 100 locations within 2 years. We could offer the kind of innovative payment technology that your company specializes in. David smiled. That sounds like exactly what I was looking for. While David was building new partnerships, the aftermath at Grandview continued to worsen. By the end of the first week, the company had received over 10,000 cancellations from customers who didn't want to support a business that discriminated against people. Social media influencers were encouraging their followers to boycott all Grandview properties. The company's troubles weren't just financial. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission announced they were launching an investigation into Grandview's employee training practices. Several civil rights organizations called for boycotts. Multiple lawsuits were filed by former customers who claimed they had also been discriminated against based on their appearance. Thomas found himself unemployable in the hospitality industry. Word had spread quickly about his role in the disaster, and no hotel chain wanted to hire the man who had cost his previous employer billions of dollars. He went from being a successful executive to being a cautionary tale told in business schools across the country. But the story didn't end with Grandview's downfall. 6 months after that terrible night at the Grand Royal Hotel, David's acquisition of the Morrison Group was complete. The newly expanded company was thriving, with innovative payment systems and a company culture built around treating every customer with respect. David had implemented comprehensive training programs for all Morrison Group employees. Every new hire learned about the importance of judging people by their character, not their appearance. The company became known throughout the industry for its exceptional customer service and inclusive atmosphere. The Grand Royal Hotel, meanwhile, had been sold to a budget hotel chain. The beautiful marble lobby where David had been humiliated was now a simple check-in area for travelers looking for affordable accommodations. The presidential suite that had started this whole mess was converted into 4 standard rooms. A year later, David was featured on the cover of Businessweek magazine with the headline, "The CEO Who Chose Values Over Profit." The article detailed how his decision to walk away from the Grandview deal had ultimately led to even greater success with Morrison Group. In the interview, David reflected on that night at the Grand Royal Hotel. People often ask me if I regret canceling that deal, he said. But I learned something important that night. The way a company treats people when they think no one important is watching tells you everything you need to know about their true values. The article noted that Morrison Group's stock price had doubled since David's acquisition, while Grandview had never recovered from their losses. The company that had judged David by his casual clothes had learned the hardest lesson in business. In a world where everyone has a camera and social media can spread news in minutes, treating people with disrespect isn't just morally wrong. It's financially devastating. Thomas, reading the article from his small apartment where he now worked as a night shift security guard, understood that some mistakes are too expensive to ever be forgiven. One night of prejudice had cost him everything and changed the entire hospitality industry forever.